This game used to freak me out as a kid. Mystical Ninja starring Goemon is a platforming adventure game released for the Nintendo 64, and as a child I absolutely hated it. No, wait, scratch that. The game hated me, or at least I was convinced it did, like it harbored a real-life evil spirit. I mean, I loved it. I thought it was awesome. I could explore, I could fight monsters, jump. Times were simpler, okay? My criteria for liking a game was basically just that it was third person and the B button swung my weapon. Ocarina of Time poisoned my mind, and I'm not even sorry about it. This is actually a super popular series in Japan, one of Capcom's cash cows, so to speak. It's been dormant for a few years, but even disregarding that, we barely have any representation for this series over here in the West. You could speculate on why. There's a huge history of not bringing games over from Japan, and unfortunately, because they assume we're dumb, is pretty high up on the list. But after playing this game, they might have a point. I never owned this game as a kid, but renting this game from my local Blockbuster, getting stuck, returning the game, getting it the next weekend, and finding out some other kid erased my save file just for me to get back to where I was to get stuck in the same place was a frustrating experience. This is really an adventure game, and a true adventure game where you have to ask people all over the towns you come across what you're supposed to do. The game is actually fairly good at signposting, but I was too busy spacing out over walls of text and being weirded out by the game's actual laugh track. I feel like this game was ahead of its time because none of what I just said would be too unusual in games today. But before the era of online game guides, in-game checkpoints, and autosaves, we had this guy. Because, oh yeah, did I mention that this game is really weird? This is likely the real reason the game's never crossed over here. The cultural barrier was high, and honestly, it still is. The game is filled with really bizarre choices and translating errors and full-on typos that it's almost surreal to watch in real time. For a young me whose only anime was Dragon Ball Z, its uniquely Japanese humor was really off-putting. Like I said, there's a laugh track in this game, but the translation is so butchered, it just seems to go off with no reason. A non-existent crowd just laughing at nothing. It's like the opposite of the Big Bang Theory without the laugh track.
Nothing makes beer taste better than cool, clear Rocky Mountain spring water.
It was so off-putting that this is the biggest reason why I thought this game was evil and creepy and I couldn't play it by myself at night. But now I can see that it's hilariously anachronistic with robots and mentions of airplanes and telephones. I remember my dad at the time specifically saying it was horribly written. It's probably my first experience with parody ever. And besides my childhood hangups, the game itself is actually amazing. I'll just go ahead and explain the first thing that stood out to me. The controls. They're really very good, tight, responsive. You do a lot of jumping in this game and have very good control over your jump height and your air position, even mid-air that rarely ever felt like a problem. Hit detection is spot on, and all the sound effects are crunchy and satisfying. The enemies have cute, quirky designs, but almost every enemy can be broken down into those that shoot you with projectiles and those that run into you. If you're like me, then there's also enemies that you run into. The art style as a whole is very charming, honestly. Game development of this era had to do so much with so little. We had to trust that this collection of polygons was the dude and his name was Goemon, or that this was a man who loves eating jelly donuts. And yeah, that's Goemon. That's the main character. There's multiple playable characters, and this one was a girl at one point in the lore, and no, I'm not going to explain. The extended lore of the series is beyond me. This has a manga, an anime, multiple games that stretch back to the NES. This game is clearly a sequel to all of that. There's characters we only hear about that are well-known associates of the gang, whatever the team is called. They also know each other, including the robot ninja Sasuke, who was created by Wise Old Man, who in this game is most famous for this. Sasuke is my favorite character, by the way. All of them play largely the same outside of their unique abilities, but the animation goes a long way to making me feel like they're different, including different little sneak animations and crawling. You can switch between anyone you've unlocked at any time, and each of them gets a unique magic and weapons like this hookshot pipe. The game's really linear up until a point, and then the game suddenly requires a lot of backtracking as you unlock items and new paths become available, and the world is pretty big. All of Japan, if you believe the in-game map. But that doesn't mean it stops being a fun world to traverse, and the main plot will have you going from town to dungeon to town to dungeon, all while listening to some awesome tunes. Because, by the way, did you know that this game has a banger soundtrack? You've already heard this in all my videos, and I'm not going to stop. Circling back to the dungeons, I was going to say that they're really kind of boring. It's less like a puzzle and more just a series of rooms with enemies in them. Sometimes you gotta defeat them all, sometimes you're just avoiding some obstacles. The first one is pretty straightforward, but it's supposed to be, isn't it? But by the time you get even to the second dungeon, you're planting seeds, going up and down elevators to reach other floors, doing a crane game, because final surprise, this game does not care about your genre classifications. You're going to be jumping and dodging 1 second. The next, you're going to be playing pool, doing a stealth minigame, rolling barrels at Ben K, sprinting down the dragon's back, and of course use a seashell to summon your giant robot, Impact, who is a movie star, to take down your enemies in both an auto-scrolling minigame and a first-person brawling game mode, complete with his own musical intro. So I can tell you that while the cultural barriers were immense as a kid, this game is actually both peak gameplay and just peak fiction. And having finally played it as an adult again, I can confirm that it's definitely not haunted by an evil spirit. And if you're watching this as this video goes up, come on over to Twitch. I'm going to be finishing the game live on stream, and definitely play this game for yourself.